Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
We're all intrigued by the dark side of humanity, even though we don't like to admit it. Because all you got to do is look at those podcasts. True crime podcasts are some of the most popular podcasts and shows on TV. And we all love a good whodunit type storyline in our soap operas. I've only been watching Coronation Street recently, and there was a serial killer in it. It was done really well, so I'm sure they took, really expert advice on how the character should be played. He's dead now, by the way, spoiler alert. He was run over by a car, which kind of killed it for me, to be honest, which I thought they would have had a trial or something. Anyway, what this says about us, I don't know, but tonight I'm delighted to be speaking to an expert on one of the darkest kind of humans, serial killers. Peter Vronsky, PhD, is an investigative historian and former film and television documentary producer. He is also the author of Serial Killers, The Method and Madness of Monsters, Sons of Cain, A History of Serial Killers from Stone Age to Present, and Female Serial Killers, How and Why Women Become Monsters. His research and interviews have been featured in numerous books and television programmes, and he joins me on the line. Good evening to you, Peter.
Good evening.
Lovely to talk to you. Peter, when I say lovely to talk to you, it's a very dark kind of hobby that you have, isn't it? I suppose, if you want to call it, for a better word, a hobby, isn't it?
It's an obsession, I guess, or a burden, both. But I am a historian, so it kind of is parallel. I mean, what is history but the history of murders? So
Yeah.
It's just private little murders.
I mean, you hold a PhD from Toronto University in the field of criminal justice history and history of espionage and international relations. But I suppose,
Yes.
because I've been watching a TV show at the moment. Most people don't admit to watching a program called Coronation Street here in Ireland and the UK. And at the moment, there's a serial killer in it. Well, he was just killed the other night. He killed 4 people. And the guy that played the role was really good. I'm sure they took some advice from somebody like you on what a person like that thinks like. But what makes somebody a serial killer? Is it just one? Is it one kill initially because it's kind of spur of the moment, and then they kind of enjoy it and decide to keep doing it, or what? Are they predisposed to that?
Every serial killer is an individual story in itself, and really none are the same. So sometimes they fantasize about doing these things since as early as the age of 5.
Wow.
Sometimes they're committing another crime and they kill someone unintentionally and it turns them on. Sometimes it's something they've always wanted to do, and we know this, that statistically the average age that they commit their first murder is around 27, 28.
That's actually older than I expected.
Gestation period.
Yeah, but that's what I was going to say. It's older than I expected. I was expecting you to say 18 or 19.
No, that's rare. 27, 28 is the average age. And so if you think about, and it's mostly males, if you think about a boy fantasizing from the age of 5 or 6, we're talking about a 20-year gestation period where they test their fantasies out. They very slowly escalate to that, first murder. And once, they cross that line, very few go back, especially the ones who have been fantasizing. In fact, it becomes kind of an addiction for them, because the problem is, of course, is they find comfort in their fantasy. But once they've acted out the fantasy, they realized it's not like the way they fantasized it. And so now they can't return back to the fantasy because they've lost that. And so all they can do is try to improve on it by trying it again. And so then you get that kind of circular serial way where, they hope that the victim did something else, or they made an error or something did not give them the satisfaction. And so it's this kind of compulsive, repetitious, addictive process, and it can go in different directions. I mean, some
Are they
burn
intelligent? Are they? Sorry for interrupting, but are they intelligent? Do serial killers generally, on average, have a high IQ or a low IQ? Are they intelligent? Like Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was quite an intelligent person.
They are of average to below normal intelligence. So that's
Okay.
a myth, that they're intelligent. What they are is they're very cunning. They have an animal instinct to people's vulnerabilities. They are very good psychologists. They can almost read your mind. But again, it's an animal instinct that we mistake for intelligence. Serial killers they're not Hannibal Lecter geniuses. Very few are above average intelligence.
And are we all capable of being a serial killer? I read somewhere, maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that human beings are 9 times more likely to kill each other for no reason in the animal kingdom than any other animal. In other words, other animals kill for prey, they kill for food, they kill for whatever it is. We tend to kill for enjoyment. Well, not all of us, obviously. Some of us do. Are we all capable of killing people, or is it only a certain percentage of the population are capable of something so horrific?
Well, we're all capable of killing, and I think all of us have at some point said, I could just kill him or I could just kill her. Most people who commit a murder regret it, and they don't do it again. Very few people will repeat a murder, cool off and think it through and then repeat it again. And that's what makes serial killers so different, is that they have no remorse. They, I don't know if enjoy is the right term, because you got to remember, too, that often it's not about the killing. For some serial killers, the actual killing is a chore. It's something else they want. They may want to have a particular sexual experience, or they may want to have your liver. One serial killer, he described it as evicting people from their bodies.
Wow.
And so killing for them, we often can't understand it because killing is such a taboo, and we can't understand how could possibly someone want to do this. And in fact, many of them don't. Many of them are willing to kill you just for something else, but for them it's a chore. Others are thrilled by the very act of taking a life.
I was going to say, is there also a thrill in getting away with it? The idea of covering it up, or where they're going to put the body, and not leaving any evidence. And is there a thrill in that as well, the getting away with it?
Oh, absolutely. And we would say that the main central motive for serial killers is control.
Yeah.
And so
they're
they have
narcissistic. Yes.
Yes, it's an enormous amount of control that they have over, not only over the victim, but over society, over the community, over a neighborhood where they strike. I mean, that's why some killers, although it's rare, but serial killers sometimes write letters to the media or to the press. There's a big question, of course, whether Jack the Ripper actually authored those letters in Whitechapel. But a lot of serial killers, they look at what other serial killers do as role models, and certainly Jack the Ripper, serial killers will, like the BTK killer or Son of Sam, write letters, and that gives them as well a lot of control as they watch these letters being published, and reporters asking questions, and police investigating. It gives them a lot of sense of control and accomplishment.
Is there something wrong with it? Because when I watched, the documentary about Aileen Wuornos, and people have often said it in relation to Aileen Wuornos, that you can see evil in her eyes. Do you believe that people are born evil, or is it's kind of the nature not nurture argument? I mean, when you look at Aileen Wuornos, and I'm sure you're well aware of who she is, and you've studied her quite intently because she's probably one of the most famous female serial killers. I mean, are people really monsters? Are there some people that are just monsters and evil?
Well, that's a kind of a joke I make that we really don't know enough, and that it's a little bit too early for us to just write off old-fashioned biblical evil. And in the case of Eileen Werner's, however, I would have to say, if you read her biography, her childhood history, I think what you see in her eyes is not evil, but just rage of what was done to her as a child. Serial killers often, before they victimize somebody, become, are victims themselves first. So in many ways, it's about revenge. It's about control. It's about regaining the control they lost as children. And Eileen Werner is certainly an interesting case because she was a female. She used a handgun, which is unlike female serial killers. And of course, she kind of reversed the often sex workers are the preferred victims of serial killers for multiple reasons, from convenience to ideological. But she reversed that. She herself was a sex worker who preyed upon customers. And she, the story, I think when we say we see evil in someone, I think we're reading into that. But I wouldn't write it off. We have not found the X factor. Here's the thing. You've got millions of children who are abused, who come from dysfunctional families. Very few of them become serial killers. And so what's the X factor? Why does one abused child become a functional member of society, and yet another becomes a serial killer or something in between? We just don't know. It's a cocktail of factors.
And you've studied obviously quite a lot of serial killers. I was going to ask you something silly and say your favorite, but who do you think when I say favorite, that would be insensitive. Who's the most intriguing, or the one that you're just blown away by, the trouble they went to, the depths of depravity maybe, or, I mean, who's the most intriguing serial killer as far as you're concerned?
It's got to be the serial killer I'm working with right now, Richard Cottingham, the torso killer. This is a serial killer who claims that he killed over 100 women in the United States between 1963 and 1980. He's been incarcerated. In 1980, he was caught. He was incarcerated for 5 murders. And then about 25 years later, he began a process of confessing. And he's now up to 18 murders. And, of course, I've been interviewing for 5 years. I was instrumental with my partner, who passed away recently, in assisting in at least 9 cold case closures in the last 18 months. So he's an old man. He he's 76 years old, and he physically, if you Google him, he looks like Santa Claus, and he is remarkable in the sense that he was a serial killer before we even had that word, serial killer. That's a very relatively recent term. It really wasn't in use until around 1981, 82. It enters the public lexicon, the media starts using it, but prior to that, we didn't have the word, we didn't have the concept. We knew there were, we called them mass murders, we called them, sequential murders, multiple murders. We never had that term serial killer until recently. So he kind of comes from an age, when he was arrested in 1980 and put on trial, he wasn't described as a serial killer yet. But by the time he went through the 5th conviction, which was 1984, by then, suddenly he's called a serial killer. So he fascinates me in that he's kind of one of the last of the unknown, forgotten serial killers. He's only
and when you're
18
talking
hours.
to him, sorry for interrupting, but when you're talking to him, when you're sitting talking to Richard, do you think he is remorseful? Is he sorry he did it? Does he
No.
regret doing it?
No. And he tells me straight up that he doesn't understand remorse. I would describe him as cognitively remorseful in that he understands intellectually that he hurt a lot of people, a lot of families. He, orphaned a lot of children, killing their mothers, and he regrets it, and he tries through confession to do what a remorseful person would do, but he does it intellectually, not emotionally, and he always reminds me of that. In that sense, he's very honest. He just says, I don't have it. I don't have remorse. I don't know how it feels like, but I know I did wrong.
Well, that kind of tells us. Well, I suppose that kind of tells us that something is wired differently when they don't get social cues, or they don't understand. Well, when I say they don't understand, if they're not remorseful, well, then there's something lacking, isn't there? I mean, I don't know if we could even class people as being insane sometimes when they get to a point where they don't understand what they've done, or they do from an intellectual point of view, but they don't from a humanitarian point of view understand what they've done.
Yeah, it's part of it is, of course, psychopathy. And so one of the things about psychopathy, of course, is a lack of remorse, a need for excitement, a nonconformity. So there are all these different factors, and only one of them is a lack of remorse. But there's also this need to take risks, this need to do dangerous things. And very few psychopaths become serial killers. It's a very small percentage. The majority of psychopaths are sitting in Parliament, or are our CEOs,
we've got a few of them here too. We've got a few of them here as well. Yeah.
and so it is indeed this kind of cocktail of things that they're very rare. It's not. We only have, I think, roughly we've calculated in history approximately maybe 5,000 or 6,000 serial killers. So if you think of how many people there, and that's around the whole world. So that's the ones we know of. So it's not a very common crime. It's just one that is kind of spectacular and very visible, and one that we pay attention to and captures our imagination. But they're very rare.
I mean, I'm looking at some of our texts coming in from our listeners, and Martin says, can you ask him, is there one common trait with the motivation of all serial killers? Is there a singular common trait?
The most common thing is control, the need for control.
Mm.
It's the absolute, seems to be the most common thing. Is they need to control the victim, they need to control their own life, they need to control those around them, and it's the ultimate act of control is when you take someone's body and you vacate them of their life and you take possession of their body. That's in the case of necrophile.
Is that trait that trait? Is it the same trait that would be in men and male and female serial killers?
Absolutely, men and females. Females will kill in a different way. In fact, female killers are much more efficient than men. Female serial killers have a career before they are arrested twice as long as a male serial killer.
Wow.
Partly because they don't do all the nonsense that male serial killers do. Male serial killers need to torture their victim, abduct their victim, abuse their victim. Females, they go straight for the heart. The kill is the most important thing. And so their female serial killers have been described as the quiet serial killers. They don't leave bodies in the schoolyard or by the side of the road. Often, female serial killers will kill in places where people die, hospitals, child care centers. They often are caregivers who take lives. And so sometimes the murders they commit, they will kill their own children. They'll kill family members. So we often don't realize, actually, that their murders are occurring. The assumption often is that this is a natural death. It's a myth that female serial killers are essentially black widows, that kill their husband or kill a lover.
Yeah.
That's a myth. Some do, but and often it's about control for them as well.
Is there a difference in your eyes and your research between, say, mass murderers and serial killers? Because somebody sent in a text and said, you should ask him about Ted Kaczynski, who is the Unabomber. In other words, somebody who wants to kill a lot of people at one time, a shooter essentially or whatever, or somebody plants a bomb.
Yeah.
Is there a different motive behind that than somebody who wants to kill people individually?
Absolutely. And it's, mass killers, they build up to this one single suicidal act. Often mass killers are destroying themselves and taking everybody with them. So it's a completely different dynamic. Very few mass killers evade arrest. I don't know what the percentage is, but, so many do not survive. Often a mass killer, the last bullet he has is for himself or herself. Mm-hmm. So it's a different cathartic type of personality. And I'm not an expert on mass killers, but definitely serial killers are there to return and to continue doing what they're doing. A mass killer just builds up to it and blows up.
Is there a problem in society whereby we've now kind of glamorized serial killers to some degree?
Oh.
When we see the popularity of crime podcasts or crime TV shows or whatever it is, that we've there's dedicated television channels just to 24 Hours to Kill and all these type of programs. Have we glamorized it?
But all these things that true crime is just another version of the Bible. I mean, the ultimate book on true crime and punishment are the scriptures. So this is something that's been in our culture, in our literature, and in all cultures, essentially. I mean, most religious scriptures are about crime and punishment and sin and so forth, right? And so true crime literature is about that. But I think the most obscene kind of glamorization of serial killers was that dreadful show Dexter, which celebrated a serial killer killing other serial killers.
Yeah. It was about vengeance more so, yes, than anything else.
It's in a way I'm kind of have to defend myself because I'm part of that literature, and here we are doing this podcast, whereas part of the, it is what it is,
and what is the obsession?
People are fascinated, and it's
I was going to say when you look at it, and I'm going to hazard a guess here. You'll know better than I do. The fascination is primarily female. So it's women who are more fascinated by this. Why is that?
80% of my readers and letters I get are women. Absolutely. Maybe because they feel that they are the victims often, and they are. I mean, statistically, women are victimized by statistically a majority of male serial killers, but male serial killers, of course. There are gay serial killers that target men, and women who target men, and so forth. And but definitely, I think because women just feel vulnerable, they want to know, who the enemy is. There's some kind of compulsion that they have that. They want to be scared. They want to read these things. I mean, a lot of women, young women, write to me asking, they have fantasies of being serial killers. I have letters from adolescent girls who read my book, Female Serial Killers, and describe to me their fantasies and ask me, what should they do? Are they going to be a serial killer? And all,
Wow.
it's a frightening thing, and
Yeah, it certainly
you know,
is.
I try to assure them that it's one thing that, you know, fantasy sometimes are ways for us to let go of things and think through
And why,
things.
why do you think America, in particular? Now, obviously, there's a bigger population, there's a large population, but in saying that, even when we look at countries with larger populations, they don't have as many serial killers. Why do you think the United States, in particular, seems to have more than its fair share of serial killers?
Well, it certainly had a fair share in a period between 1970 and 1999. We had this kind of serial killer epidemic where
The Zodiac, remember the Zodiac one? Yeah, there was
American
one.
Yeah, the Zodiac, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, my guy. They were all in that 3-decade period where you had 83% of all known American serial killers made their appearance in that 30-year period. And I certainly have a hypothesis that has to do with who their fathers were and what they experienced in the Second World War.
Oh, okay.
And now that would have to, of course, apply to France and England. You know, there was a lot of British soldiers that came back, but I suspect that in Britain, soldiers' trauma from the war was handled a little bit different than it was in the United States. It was much more repressed, and what you know, it wasn't that good war that we've all described the Second World War, especially in the Pacific, where it was essentially a race war. And so a lot of soldiers came back traumatized from that war with no benefit of a PTSD diagnosis the way Vietnam veterans, for example, had. And so I ran across all these accounts of serial killers from that generation describing their wartime fathers as these kind of sullen men that kind of vanished in their life. Certainly the absence of a male father figure is a common theme in serial killer childhoods, whether they were, you know, war veterans or otherwise. There is
So are you saying statistically? Okay, so what you're saying statistically is killers are more likely to come from broken homes or single parent families.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Serial killers come from traumatic, broken families make for good serial killer spawning grounds. Absolutely.
And is there any intervention, that can stop a serial killer before their first kill, which would prevent them killing in the first place? I mean, is there any way of spotting this, or should we be doing that more often, or is there any way that we can intervene and stop there? Is there intervention, or is it just too late? Because you mentioned earlier on they're fantasizing about this since they're 5 years of age. So can you stop them?
It's a utopian notion. I think there's at some point in one of my books I ended with a thing: just be kind to your children. We got to take care of our children, because if children, one thing about serial killers is they're very lonely as children, and there are reasons for that. Sometimes they're rejected by peers, sometimes for good reasons. Often it's a combination of things, but one thing for sure is that serial killers are very lonely. And in that loneliness, they find comfort in fantasies. And if they are, on top of being lonely, bullied as well, they begin to develop fantasies of revenge and control. And then when they hit puberty, they begin to sexualize those fantasies. And so it begins indeed very early. And it is a utopian idea that, of course, if every family took care of their children, every family was undamaged, we would have no serial killers and we'd all be in paradise, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, it's intriguing. I could talk to you for hours, actually, because so many people are interested. I meant to text me, get in. Somebody wants to know again the name of the serial killer you mentioned earlier on. It was Richard. What was it? What was his name again? Sorry, the name of the serial killer, the one you interviewed yourself.
Richard F. Cottingham. an Irishman. In fact,
Wow.
one of his ancestors was a martyr in the Easter Rebellion, and the family ends up in Mott Haven, the Irish quarter of New York City is where he's born. Richard F. Cottingham, the Torso Killer.
The Torso Killer. Okay, for anybody who wants to look it up. But look, you have a lot of books out that people can read as well. You're an author as well. The Method of Madness of Monsters, Sons of Cain, A History of Serial Killers from the Stone Age to the Present, and Female Serial Killers, How and Why Women Become Monsters. And they're all available, I'm assuming, on Amazon and all the usual places if people want to pick them up.
Yes, there.
It's been wonderful talking to you, and it's also been interesting talking to you, and I'm sure we will speak to you again. Peter Vronsky,
Thanks.
PhD. Listen, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.
There you go. I thought that was very interesting, actually. And people have an obsession with crime. I know Jane has, because she had a load of questions written down for me here, because she's a real obsession. And it is, he said it himself, it's 80% female. Women that have this kind of obsession, with crime. Why is that? Well, Peter described exactly why he believes it is, because he believes that women believe they're vulnerable. And also this idea that women write to serial killers on death row. What's that all about? But women get married to them. They marry them while they're on death row, or while they're on a 50-year sentence or something like that for being a serial killer. They want to marry them. It's bizarre, isn't it? The world is a strange place.
Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.